This is going to be a good one. So it's a special. We are going to be ranking the top 10 teams, so all of you, in this league in order. So I'm not really going to touch too much on the recap from this week. When I go down each team, I'll say what happened, and then I guess I'll talk about your team. So it'll kind of be like a recap. But it's going to be a little bit more concise, and it's going to be more about your overall team and the outlook for the rest of this season. Also, this isn't intentional, but I realized that a whiteboard's right behind me, so because I'm in my office. So as a result, because of that, I am going to write the rankings on the board just to be unnecessarily dramatic. So before we get into all that, let's talk about another trade that happened. Whenever I see trade in this league, I get a little concerned that it's going to be insane. And then when I see the profits involved, I get absolutely positive that it's going to be insane. And with this trade, it was insane. Saquon and Mahomes goes to TBD. The profit gives them up for Eckler and then Emmanuel Sanders and Ryan Tannehill. So what can we say here? Saquon and Eckler. This is actually pretty close to home for me because I had the decision in the first round this year between Eckler and Saquon, and it was one of the hardest fantasy decisions I've made in my life. I chose Saquon because in my eyes, I was thinking full season, and starting week 3 after Saquon had the two games in 5 days, I figured Saquon was more of a workhorse back, goal line guy, and he has more upside. What's happened since then? Basically what I expected, except Eckler has a little bit more goal line usage than I would have thought. So Eckler's value is a little bit higher than I initially thought, and even, of course, the first 2 weeks, Eckler was massively more valuable than Saquon. Now that we're in this time period, since that's when the trade happened, and we have Saquon and Eckler, I view them probably back-to-back in the rankings, probably 5 and 6 when I did it in my head really quickly. But I think I go Eckler a little bit of an edge over Saquon, but not much, but a little bit. All that to say, very close. Let's push them to the side and say they cancel out. And I'll give you Eckler being a little bit more valuable, sure. Mahomes for Emmanuel Sanders and Tannehill. So Emmanuel Sanders shouldn't be played. I understand the bench stash, but he shouldn't be played. So let's talk about Mahomes and Tannehill. Actually, let's not even talk about it. It's so obvious. Also, this league, if I'm not mistaken, is 6 points for a passing touchdown. So quarterback's the most important position. You had the number 1 quarterback, and you let him go for Tannehill, whose value has absolutely tanked to the point where I would not think that he is startable. I guess back end startable, but not a team who starts him is going to have one of the worst starting quarterbacks in basically every matchup. So this trade makes no sense. This trade makes absolutely no sense. Awful trade. TBD gets massive upgrade, adding Mahomes as his quarterback, and the profit, although I've been hard on the profit up to this point, takes an even bigger value and dump down. So with that said, we can go into the rankings, and we're going to start at number 10. And number 10, this is so unnecessary, and I have awful handwriting. Oh, and it's also backwards. You know what? We're just not going to do this. It's not visible, but you already know what's coming. Number 10 goes to Team the Prophet. Team the Prophet currently in a position where there's not much to be hopeful about. What you could be hopeful about is no longer on your team anymore. So when we look at your team really briefly, and you lost 128 to 126, so you lost a tight one. Yes, you would have won if you kept Mahomes, who went absolutely off, but you didn't. So you go to 0-4 now. Not much to be excited about. Really, that's all to be said. I already talked enough about your team. This is a team that is not going to make the playoffs and has to rebuild for next year. I'm sure this person's a great person, and we all have our off seasons. For Team the Prophet, this is an off season. Number 9, coming in at number 9, Team L Captain. For Team L Captain, they also dropped to 0-4. There's a lot more to be excited about if you're Team L Captain. There's actually still potential here. I am not going to done chain them just yet because Jonathan Taylor did have a big week despite there being news that he has an injury that will linger with him all season. He has his best game of the season. A lot to be excited about. Devontae with an off week, but you would assume he's going to do better. CD with an off week, you're going to assume he's going to do much better. I really like that wide receiver group. I think Hubbard's probably going to give you better weeks. So as long as you start Lamar Jackson over Carr, because that to me is such a no-brainer, and Lamar didn't even have a great week. Lamar, in my opinion, honestly, is 100% going to be a top 3 quarterback. Maybe I'm delusional because he's my quarterback, but I really think he's going to be definitely a top 3. I think he could be the top fantasy scorer the rest of the season. Maybe 6-point passing touchdown, a little bit less likely than my league where it's 4 and you get more for rushing, but I don't know how you bench Lamar. But assuming Lamar's your starting quarterback, there is potential here. Honestly, kind of wanted to not make you number 9, but I kind of had to because you are 0-4 and you did make a poor decision. But I think if utilized correctly, this team can be a little bit more valuable. So I did put you in at number 9. Number 8, the team I was going to switch you with, a team I was very high on coming to the season, a team that's now 1-3, Team Professor S. Hard to really say what went wrong for Professor S. I don't even remember why I fell so in love with him because I feel like there's been a roster move that I'm missing. Unless this is the team I really liked before the season. I was really high on Kyler and that worked out. I was pretty high on Gibson, that worked out. The rest of your team, though, I mean, there's a lot of misses, a lot of guys who don't provide the value that their names may entail. D-Hop is the only guy I'm still as high on as I was before the season. The targets are getting spread evenly, but I still think he's going to be your main guy. To be honest, if you were 0-4 and Captain was 1-3, I probably would put Captain before you. I think this is really a two-way tie at 8 in reality. But I think all these teams that I'm talking about here are going to have a really tough time making the playoffs. And number 7, the team that was playing Professor S got the win 178-134. It's Team Sons of Chaos. Team Sons of Chaos having a really big week, so you have to be excited there. A lot of that has to do with Tyreek getting you 53.6 points. Robert Woods finally finding the end zone. David Montgomery getting you 2 touchdowns. J-Rob getting you 2 touchdowns. So everything really came together except you lose your tight end, Logan Thomas, to an injury. He's probably missing short period of time. I think he's not even designated 100% out next week. I think he will miss a week, though. You have Jared Cook as your backup, so not awful, but that's a downgrade at tight end. Let's not fool ourselves. Logan Thomas runs a route every single time, and he's not old like Jared Cook is. But Jared Cook's still a pretty good option at backup, so I give you that. But you really, the crime here is you lose David Montgomery for 5 weeks. And that's where you're like, how's a 3-1 team all the way down at number 7 in the rankings? That is your answer. You're going to be losing Dave Montgomery for 5 weeks. So your running back group now becomes James Robinson, who I like, but RB1, most times you're not going to have the best running back in your matchup. And then your RB2 falls to a guy that everyone knows I'm not high on, Leonard Fournette. And Leonard Fournette, for me, is just not the best option. That's just a passing offense. And he's still going to have to share some of that action with Gio and Rojo. So I think your running back group is one of the weaker ones in the league. You have a decent wide receiver group. This is a solid team. You're 3-1. I think as far as making the playoffs, again, when I give rankings or when I do done chains, it's rankings, chances to win it all. I don't think this team has a star power. I think you're going to have trouble staying at the top of the standings without Montgomery. I think there's a team that's going to probably end up around 500, maybe slightly above. But I don't see it as a main threat in the playoffs, and that's why I came in at number 7. At number 6, Team the Chairman. So yeah, I ranked a 1-3 team ahead of a 3-1 team. That is because I think top to bottom, every position is accounted for on this team. I think that it's a strong overall team. Josh Allen at quarterback, fantastic. And by the way, this team lost by 30 this week to Pain Train, who we'll get to later. This is why he's 1-3. But Zeke and Darrell Henderson just easily now showing he's the number 1 running back there. Michelle with a fumble shows that he's not going to threaten for touches, so that's really good news. Zeke doing what you'd expect Zeke to do. So you're covered at quarterback and running back, and then your wide receiver group. You see Diggs eclipse the 100-yard mark for the first time this season. That's great news. Mike Evans, a guy I'm not even that high on, gets 12 targets, so you really got to be higher on him than I am. Maybe it's unreasonable. And Mike Williams, a guy I'm definitely not high on, that everyone was super high on. I think he's definitely startable, but I mean, everyone's talking about wide receiver 1. I think he's low on wide receiver 2 for the rest of the season. But I mean, as your third wide receiver, that's still just about as good as you could get as a third wide receiver. Then you get Waller, who just continues to shine. And if I stop there, this is a top 3, top 5 team for sure. The reason the issue comes in with depth, I think we've talked about this earlier in the season. I mean, Fuller in your flex was a bad play, and he gets injured, so that hurts even more. So who do you really have to lean on? There's not much to work with. Gaskin, unbelievably disappointing. McKissick, probably your next best guy. There's an issue with depth on this team, and that's why you find yourself at 6 in the rankings. But yes, absolute playoff fringe team, can make a push. I still think at 1 and 3, you're better than teams that are above you in the standings, including Sons of Chaos. At number 5, we have Pain Train. Pain Train going to 3-1 after beating the chairman. Pain Train, this is where we talk about not just not having major holes, but actually having massive, massive star power. Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, assuming he's healthy. Amari Cooper showing that he still has it. Not getting targeted as much, but they didn't pass the ball much, Dallas. But he still is able to get a productive day when they don't pass much, so that's pretty big. Godwin having an off week, but you would still think, in my opinion, he's the best option on that offense. And then Clyde Edwards-Helaire bringing in value. He's at your flex. So when we look at holes, I mean, wide receiver 3, you have Sutton, but he gets 8 targets. So, I mean, that's a fine wide receiver 3. Tyler Higbee at tight end, but 6 targets again, he's a good option. And then you have Cordarrelle Patterson on the bench, so where you could plug in anyway, as well as Hollywood. So, I mean, this team does have depth, doesn't have holes, and has some star power. And that's where we kind of draw the line between top 5, bottom 5. That's why Pain Train comes in at 5, and that's going to be something that, in my opinion, you're going to see from all of your top 5 teams. At 4 comes in TBD. TBD going to 3-1 after winning 153 to 106. And yeah, I mean, I would have given TBD lower on the rankings if it wasn't for that trade. And you made the trade, and he now has Mahomes, which is the biggest asset in this league. He has Saquon to pair with Josh Jacobs to keep his running back group at least average in this league, probably a little bit above average. And then the wide receiver, and then Kelsey at the best tight end. The wide receiver group is where the conversation comes in, is like, why isn't this guy a top team? It's because A-Rob has been such a big disappointment. I have no issue with Keenan Allen. I actually really like Keenan Allen. Deontay Johnson, 13 targets. It's hard to find an argument against him. I was nervous that volume would be spread out, but there's been injuries, and that Claypool missed this past game. If even one of those wide receivers are gone, I am all on Deontay being a top 10 potential receiver. With all 3 there, I still, whatever. But he's your second or third receiver. I mean, that's very strong. And then Allen Robinson, will he come back? I think there's still value there. I still think if he's your third receiver, I mean, that's a great third receiver option. In the flex, when we talk about not having issues with depth, I mean, I guess this is where I might counter myself a little bit. There isn't massive issues with depth. You have decent options. Jalen Waddle's a decent option in the flex. Then Madison will come in at some points if Dalvin's out and be fantastic. Peyton Barber, if Jacobs is out, could be fantastic. Damian Harris still has potential to be good. So right now, I mean, I wouldn't say there's a hole because there's a lot of guys who could fill it. But this is probably why you're not a top 3 team because, again, top heavy, I really like this team, especially with Mahomes. I mean, any team with Mahomes is going to be a competitor this year, which maybe I shouldn't say because I did done chain the profit when he had Mahomes. But, hey, it is what it is. Okay. Next team, top 3, coming in at number 3, I'm going Livin' La Vida Yoda. He's probably surprised because he put up a dud of a week and went 2-2. But let's talk about what didn't work this week. I mean, Kamara only getting you 16 points, but he got 26 carries. Kamara's going to cash in. Your running backs are fantastic. That's what I like the most. Najee and Kamara to pair with Russell Wilson. That's a really great start. Wide receivers, what we've had an issue with this team because, again, and DeAndre Swift. It's just a ridiculous running back group. And then Kittle at tight end. I mean, wow. Wide receiver is the reason this isn't a top team. I mean, Brandon Cooks is a very good option. Thielen is a very good option. Those are 2 wide receiver 2s, in my opinion, high-end wide receiver 2s. So I'm okay with them being your 1 and 2 option. Tim Patrick, I don't love as your third receiver. That's the issue I have with this team. But you have Jamison Crowder, who's a PPR monster, and he has a pretty good matchup next week, so he might be worth plugging in. You have James Conner, who's getting you touchdowns for that crazy RB depth. You have Zach Moss for crazy RB depth. And you have Robbie Anderson. You could hope that he's going to come through. He finally gets you 11 targets, so there's a lot to be excited about. And that's why you're at number 3. Again, not top to bottom, all studs, but this is a very, very strong team, and that's why you come at number 3. Top 2, you already know where this is going to go because you already know who I'm super high on. So number 2 is Team the Crucifier. High on this team, 3-1. Wins 128 to 126, barely beating out the Prophet. I mean, definitely not the most exciting week. A lot of that has to do with Dalvin having an off week because Dalvin was actually out for much of the game. Chris Carson also having an off week. Usage is a little bit concerning, but overall, this running back group I still put as the top half of the league. I think that's very solid. And your wide receiver group, definitely one of the best in the league by far. Ridley, Kupp, and Metcalf. I mean, how can you not see that and salivate? What I actually really do want to talk about this team is the tight end position. I was low on Goddard, and Goddard, though, still showing that he could be a very startable tight end. He gets you 5 catches, 56 yards, and a touchdown. He had another touchdown, which off a remarkable play that was called back. So, I mean, this guy could have put up 25 points at your tight end, and then you put Edmonds in your flex. I mean, that's top to bottom strong. You have Rodgers as your backup quarterback. Insane. That's trade bait if I've ever seen it. You have Lockett on the bench, an unbelievable bench. I can't believe you were able to make it. You have lottery tickets like Josh Gordon on your bench as well. Pittman, who could really work out. This is a team. This is when we're talking about top teams. We're talking about star power. We're talking about depth. We're talking about no holes, and we're talking about trade bait. I mean, this is all you could hope for in a team. The only thing you could hope for more is if you were to be Team Glory Hole, our best team in the league, the team we've been hyping up all season, over 200 points this week. What else can you say? I mean, I'm not even going to break this team down because we've spoken about it so much. Won by 100 points this week. It's all over the place. First round picks. If there were a redraft this year, Aaron Jones and Nick Chubb are first round picks. Jefferson, McLaurin, and DJ Moore are second to early third round picks. Hawkinson late third, probably at tight end. I mean, this is an insanely stacked team that was able to bench Kareem Hunt, who's a no-brainer player. Bench Miles Sanders, who almost would start on basically any team. Deebo Samuel start on basically any team. Mark Andrews at tight end would start on basically any team. It's almost comedic how good this team is. Out of all the leagues I'm recapping, this is by far the best team. This is the way we spoke about, I believe, to be El Professor all of last year when we were talking about them likely winning it all basically throughout the season. I feel that way about this team. I don't see how this team without injury loses it. And even with depth, with injury, I think it's going to sustain a ton. Anything can happen in fantasy, but man, you really set yourself up well. That's our number one team. I said this would be a concise recap. We still made it to 16, which was a little bit more than I thought, but that is where everyone stands today. We'll do this again maybe in like 4 to 5 weeks. We'll go back to recaps next week in a little bit more of a structured way too. And yeah, I appreciate you all watching. I wish you all the best of luck next week.